The renowned surgeon's daughter had never walked in her entire life until the humble janitor's son gently whispered, "Please let me try to help you." What happened next left everyone speechless. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Dr. Robert Williams had performed over 3,000 surgeries in his 12-year career, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of his daughter Sophie lying motionless in that hospital bed 8 years ago. Born with a rare spinal condition that left her legs completely paralyzed, Sophie had become both his greatest joy and his deepest pain. "Daddy, look at this!" Sophie shouted from her wheelchair, her golden curls bouncing as she spun the wheels with practiced ease. At 8 years old, she navigated Santa Clara Medical Center as if she owned the place, which in many ways she did. Every nurse, every doctor, every staff member knew Sophie Williams, the bright-eyed daughter of the surgeon who spent most afternoons in the pediatric ward while her father worked his demanding schedule. Robert watched from the nurse's station, his heart filling with pride and aching with guilt. He had consulted every specialist, reviewed every case study, explored every experimental treatment. Nothing. The best medical minds in the country had told him the same thing. Sophie would never walk. "She's something special, that little one," came a soft voice beside him. Carmen Rodriguez, the night janitor, stood quietly mopping the floor. Her son, Diego, a shy 7-year-old with striking blonde hair that seemed almost out of place with his Hispanic heritage, sat on a nearby bench reading a worn picture book. Robert nodded, managing a tired smile. "She is. I just wish—" He stopped himself, the familiar weight of helplessness settling on his shoulders. Carmen paused her cleaning, studying him with knowing eyes. "Sometimes the answers we're looking for aren't found in the places we're looking, Doctor." Before Robert could ask what she meant, Diego suddenly looked up from his book, his bright blue eyes fixed intensely on Sophie. The boy stood slowly, almost as if in a dream, and walked toward her wheelchair. "Hi," Diego said quietly, his small hand reaching out to touch Sophie's leg. "Does it hurt?" Sophie shook her head, smiling. "I can't feel anything down there. The doctors say the messages from my brain can't reach my legs." Diego nodded seriously, his hand still resting gently on her knee. "Maybe they're just taking the wrong path," he whispered. And then something impossible happened. Sophie's left foot twitched. Both children looked down in stunned silence. Sophie's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Did you see that, Daddy? Did you see that?" Robert rushed over, his medical training fighting against the impossibility of what he had witnessed. Sophie's foot had definitely moved. Just a small twitch, but movement nonetheless, movement that hadn't existed for 8 years. "I felt something," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, I actually felt something." As Robert knelt beside his daughter's wheelchair, checking her reflexes with trembling hands, he caught a glimpse of Carmen in his peripheral vision. The janitor stood motionless, her face pale as death, staring at her son with what appeared to be pure terror. What was Carmen Rodriguez so afraid of? And why did Diego seem completely unsurprised by what had just happened? If you're finding this story fascinating, don't forget to share in the comments your first impressions about what might be happening here. Dr. Robert Williams hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every medical journal, every neurological study, every case report on spontaneous recovery was spread across his office desk like pieces of an impossible puzzle. Empty coffee cups formed a small graveyard beside his computer, testament to his desperate search for answers that didn't seem to exist in any textbook. Sophie's foot had moved 3 more times since yesterday. Each twitch documented, measured, analyzed with the precision of a man whose world suddenly made no sense. The movements were small but deliberate, not the random muscle spasms that sometimes tormented paralyzed patients, but purposeful flexions that responded to Sophie's conscious commands. The nerve pathways show absolutely no change, Dr. Patricia Hayes, the hospital's chief neurologist, said categorically while reviewing Sophie's latest MRI results. Her voice carried the weight of 20 years treating spinal injuries, 20 years delivering hard truths to desperate families. The damage is identical to her previous scans. What happened yesterday was probably a muscle spasm. False hope is cruel, Robert. But Robert had seen his daughter's face when that first movement occurred. The pure joy, the tears of possibility streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "I felt it, Daddy. I really felt it." This wasn't the reaction of a child experiencing a meaningless spasm. Patricia, she felt sensation, real sensation. Temperature, pressure, touch, things that haven't existed for her since birth, Robert insisted, pulling out the detailed notes he'd been keeping. Look at these response tests. Yesterday, she couldn't feel anything below her waist. Today, she correctly identified hot and cold stimuli on both feet. Dr. Hayes adjusted her glasses, studying the data with clinical detachment. Coincidence, psychological response. The mind is powerful, Robert. Sometimes it creates sensations that aren't actually there. There are documented explanations for everything you're showing me. Where's Diego today? Sophie interrupted from her wheelchair, rolling into the office with the determination that reminded Robert so much of himself. Her golden curls bounced with each push of the wheels, and her blue eyes sparkled with an excitement Robert hadn't seen in years. I want to see Diego again. Maybe he can help me move my whole foot this time. Dr. Hayes's eyebrows raised in confusion. Diego, the janitor's son, Robert explained, watching his colleague's expression change to that thinly disguised judgment he'd encountered before when discussing unconventional treatments. Sympathy mixed with professional skepticism, the look that said, desperate father grasping at straws. Robert, Patricia said gently, I understand your hope, but attributing your daughter's progress to a 7-year-old boy isn't helping anyone. We need to focus on realistic treatment options. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the hospital's basement level, Carmen Rodriguez scrubbed the same spot on the linoleum for the 15th time, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the mop. Her mind kept replaying yesterday's impossible scene, her son's small hand on Sophie's leg, the look of serene concentration on his face, the way he seemed to know exactly what to do. Diego sat nearby in his usual spot, unusually quiet for a chatty 7-year-old, drawing figures with worn crayons on the back of discarded patient forms. His artwork showed stick figures holding hands, their bodies surrounded by swirls of golden light that seemed to flow from one person to another. Mijo, we need to talk, Carmen whispered in Spanish, kneeling beside her son. Her voice trembled with barely contained panic. Yesterday with the doctor's little girl, what exactly did you do? Diego looked up with those impossible blue eyes, eyes that reminded Carmen too much of her own grandmother, eyes that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond their years. I just touched her, Mama, like Abuela Elena taught you when you were little. Carmen's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She had never told Diego about her grandmother's teachings, never mentioned the old woman's claims about healing hands, about the family gift that supposedly skipped generations. She had buried those memories when she left Colombia 15 years ago, determined to live a normal American life, free from the supernatural whispers of her childhood. Diego, you can't do this anymore. Promise me you won't touch sick people like that again. But Mama, Diego said with the simple logic of childhood, Sophie was so sad before. Her legs didn't work, and it made her cry. Now she's happy and can feel things. Isn't that good? Promise me. Carmen's voice cracked with desperation, drawing curious glances from passing staff members. Diego nodded slowly, but his small fingers continued drawing healing hands with crayons, as if guided by instincts he couldn't fully understand or control. That night, Carmen sat in her small apartment, staring at the faded photograph she had hidden in a shoebox for 15 years, buried under winter clothes and forgotten memories. Her grandmother, Elena Vasquez, stood in their Colombian village square, hands pressed against a boy's chest, surrounded by a crowd of believers and skeptics. That same boy had walked for the first time that day after 3 years of polio-induced paralysis. Abuela, Carmen whispered to the photograph, her voice breaking in the empty room. What did you pass to him? What did you put in his blood? She remembered Elena's warnings as clearly as if they'd been spoken yesterday. The gift comes with a price, mija. Each healing takes something from the healer. The stronger the healing, the greater the cost. Promise me you'll never teach this to your children. Let the gift die with me. But somehow, impossibly, Diego knew anyway. He had been born with knowledge that should have died with Elena. How about leaving your like if you're enjoying this story? Your interaction helps us a lot to continue bringing content like this. The next morning at Santa Clara Medical Center, Sophie waited anxiously in the physical therapy room, her wheelchair positioned near the parallel bars she had never been able to use. Her legs had shown 3 more episodes of movement during the night, each one stronger and more controlled than the last. The nursing staff whispered about miracles in the hallways while doctors maintained their professional skepticism behind closed doors. I moved my ankle 5 times this morning, Sophie announced proudly to anyone who would listen. Real movements, not just twitches, and I could feel the blanket on my toes when I woke up. Physical therapist Janet Morrison documented everything with careful notes, torn between professional training and growing amazement. Muscle tone is definitely improving, she told Robert during his morning visit. I've never seen anything like this in a case with this level of spinal damage. Diego appeared in the doorway with his mother, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually neat uniform was wrinkled and coffee-stained. Sophie! Diego ran toward her with the enthusiasm of childhood friendship, ignoring Carmen's sharp intake of breath and desperate grab for his arm. Diego! I felt my toes this morning, both feet. Sophie's excitement was contagious, drawing a crowd of nurses, orderlies, and even some visiting doctors who had heard about the mysterious recovery. That's wonderful, Diego said simply, reaching out for her hands with the natural compassion that made him special. The moment their skin touched, Sophie gasped audibly. I can feel warmth like sunshine going down through all my legs, reaching places that have been dark for so long. Dr. Robert appeared in the doorway, having been summoned by the commotion. He watched with fascination, tinged with growing alarm, as his daughter's legs began showing subtle but definite muscle contractions, voluntary movements that shouldn't exist according to every diagnosis she'd ever received. How is this possible? He asked no one in particular, his medical training struggling against the evidence before his eyes. Carmen stepped forward, her voice barely audible above the excited chatter of the crowd. Dr. Williams, could we speak privately, please? As they walked toward his office, neither adult noticed Diego swaying slightly on his feet, or the way he pressed his small hand against his chest, where his heart was racing with an unnatural rhythm. The price Elena had warned about was already being paid, 1 heartbeat at a time. Comment below what you think is happening with Diego. Your theories might be more right than you imagine. Dr. Robert Williams had built his entire reputation on facts, evidence, and scientific method. He had published papers in prestigious journals, given lectures at medical conferences, and never deviated from evidence-based medicine. But watching his daughter's impossible recovery was forcing him into uncharted territory, where medical training met inexplicable mystery. I want to run comprehensive tests on the boy, he told Dr. Hayes during their morning rounds, his voice carrying the determination that had made him one of the hospital's youngest department heads. Complete blood work, neurological assessment, cardiac monitoring, everything we have, Doctor. Hayes stopped walking, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine concern. Robert, you're chasing ghosts. The child is 7 years old and perfectly healthy. What exactly do you expect to find? Evidence, explanation, something that makes sense of what I'm witnessing. Robert pulled up Sophie's charts on his tablet. Look at these progress notes. 3 days ago, complete paralysis below the waist. Today, voluntary muscle control and restored sensation in both legs. This doesn't happen, Patricia, ever. Recovery from spinal injuries can be unpredictable. Not this unpredictable, not this complete, not this fast. Robert's voice rose with frustration. And every significant improvement coincides with his contact with Diego Rodriguez. Dr. Hayes sighed deeply, the sound of a veteran physician who had seen too many desperate families clinging to impossible explanations. Even if that were true, which medically it cannot be, what are you suggesting? That a janitor's son has healing powers? We're doctors, Robert, not faith healers or mystics. But Robert couldn't forget what he had witnessed with his own eyes. Sophie's progress defied every textbook, every case study, every principle of neurology he had ever learned. In 3 days, she had regained partial sensation in both legs, could flex her ankles voluntarily, and even showed early signs of thigh muscle activation. He found Carmen during her lunch break, sitting alone in the hospital chapel, a small, quiet room that most staff members forgot existed. Afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the simple wooden pews. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need your permission to examine Diego. Nothing invasive or harmful, just routine medical tests to understand what's happening." Carmen's hands trembled as they gripped a worn rosary. "Doctor, please understand. My son is just a normal boy. He goes to school, plays with toys, watches cartoons. He's not whatever you think he is. Your son appears to be helping my daughter in ways I can't medically explain. As a doctor and as a father, I need to understand how this is possible. And if you can't explain it scientifically, will you try to stop it? Will you separate them?" The question hung between them like a challenge, forcing Robert to confront possibilities he hadn't fully considered. Understanding might indeed mean ending Sophie's recovery if the mechanism was deemed too dangerous or unpredictable. "I just want to help both of them," he said finally, the honesty in his voice evident even to himself. Carmen studied his face carefully, seeing genuine concern rather than exploitation or medical curiosity. After a long moment, she spoke quietly. "There are things about healing that your medical books don't teach, Doctor. My grandmother knew this truth, but knowledge like hers comes with consequences you may not be prepared for." "What kind of consequences?" Before Carmen could answer, a code blue alarm echoed through the hospital corridors, followed by the terrifying sound of a child's voice screaming in pain. Both adults rushed toward the sound, their hearts pounding with sudden dread. They found Diego collapsed in the pediatric ward, unconscious and burning with fever, his small body convulsing slightly. Sophie sat in her wheelchair beside him, tears streaming down her face as she reached desperately toward her fallen friend. "He was helping me practice moving my legs," she sobbed. "We were alone, and I asked him to touch my knees like yesterday. Then he just fell down and started shaking." Robert knelt beside the unconscious boy, his medical training taking over as he checked pulse, breathing, and responsiveness. Diego's heartbeat was weak and irregular, as if his small body was fighting an invisible battle that was slowly draining his life force. "Get him to pediatric ICU now," Robert ordered, lifting Diego in his arms and feeling how the 7-year-old had become frighteningly light. "Leave us in the comments if you've ever experienced something inexplicable like this. Sometimes life surprises us in ways that science still can't explain." Diego remained unconscious in the pediatric ICU for 18 agonizing hours, connected to monitors that beeped ominously in the sterile room. His vital signs fluctuated wildly, fever spiking to dangerous levels of 40 degrees before dropping to near hypothermic temperatures that made alarms sound. His heart rate alternated between racing at 150 beats per minute and barely detectable bradycardia that terrified the nursing staff. Carmen never left his bedside, holding his small hand while whispering prayers in Spanish and English, ancient words her grandmother had taught her mixed with desperate pleas to whatever god might be listening. Robert found himself checking on the boy every hour, unable to concentrate on his other patients or responsibilities. "Blood work is completely normal," Dr. Hayes reported, her voice confused and concerned. "Brain scans show no trauma, no infection, no tumors, no explanation for the neurological symptoms. His white blood count is perfect, no sign of illness or disease." But Sophie's progress has stopped completely, Robert observed. The impossible correlation undeniable. Since Diego fell unconscious, his daughter had shown no further improvement. Her newly recovered sensations remained stable, but didn't advance. The connection seemed inescapable now, though it defied everything Robert believed about medicine. When Diego finally opened his eyes, pale blue and unfocused, his first whispered word was, "Sophie." "I'm here, mijo," Carmen said, squeezing his hand and trying to hide her tears. "You're safe now. Mama's here. Is Sophie okay? Did I help her enough?" His voice was weak but filled with genuine concern for his friend, rather than his own condition. Robert stepped forward, his doctor instincts fighting against a growing paternal protectiveness toward this extraordinary child. "Diego, can you tell me what happens when you touch Sophie? What do you feel inside your body?" The boy looked at his mother with questioning eyes, seeking permission to speak truths that sounded impossible. Carmen nodded reluctantly, knowing the time for secrets had passed. "It's like her hurt comes into me, and my good feelings go to her," Diego explained, with the simple wisdom children use to describe complex realities that adults struggle to understand. "The broken parts of her legs talk to the strong parts of my legs, and we trade places for a little while." Robert felt his scientific worldview shifting like tectonic plates. "Does it hurt when this happens?" "At first it's warm and nice, like when Mama hugs me. But then it gets heavy, like I'm carrying something too big for me. And after, I get really tired." "Abuela Elena was my grandmother," Carmen explained to Robert, her voice thick with emotion. "She died when Diego was 3. He shouldn't remember her teachings, but somehow—" She gestured helplessly at her son, struggling with the impossibility of inherited memory. "She visits me sometimes in dreams," Diego added, as if conversations with deceased great-grandmothers were perfectly normal. "She says I'm like her, but I have to be stronger because the hurt in this world is bigger than it used to be. She teaches me how to find the broken places and fix them." Robert felt everything he had learned in medical school, everything he believed about healing and human anatomy, being challenged by a 7-year-old, speaking with the calm certainty of experience. "Diego, when you help Sophie, it makes you sick, but she was so sad before, and her daddy was sad too. Now she smiles and can feel her feet. It's worth getting tired for." The simple truth of it hit Robert like a physical blow to the chest. This child was literally sacrificing his health to heal his daughter, and he did it willingly out of pure compassion and love. "We need to stop this," Robert said suddenly, the words torn from his throat. "I can't let you hurt yourself for Sophie. No parent should ask this of another child." "But doctor," Diego said quietly, his voice carrying wisdom beyond his years, "Sophie isn't all better yet. She still can't walk, and I promised I would help her." At 2 in the morning, with the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, Carmen finally broke her 15-year silence about her grandmother's legacy. Sitting in Robert's office, surrounded by medical texts and diplomas that suddenly seemed inadequate, she told him everything she had tried to forget. Elena Vasquez was known throughout our village and 3 neighboring towns as La Sanadora, the healer. People came from hundreds of miles away, bringing their sick children, their dying parents, their broken bodies and shattered hopes. And she helped all of them, every person who came to her door. Robert leaned forward, his medical training fighting against growing fascination. How exactly did she do it? The same way Diego helped Sophie. She absorbed their pain, their sickness, their broken bones and dying organs. She took it all into herself through touch, through intention, through a kind of love that cost everything. Carmen's voice broke as she remembered her grandmother's final years, and it killed her. Eventually, the gift demands payment, doctor. Each healing shortens the healer's life. Elena died at 43, but she saved hundreds of people before the price became too high to pay. She looked 70 when she died, aged by all the suffering she had taken into her own body. Robert looked at the photograph Carmen had brought, a young woman in traditional Colombian dress who bore a striking resemblance to Diego. with the same piercing blue eyes, the same gentle smile, the same aura of quiet strength. She made me promise never to teach this to my children, said the gift was too dangerous, too costly. But Diego was born knowing these things. The gift skipped my generation entirely and went straight to him, stronger than it had ever been before. How much time does he have if he continues helping Sophie? Carmen's voice cracked under the weight of impossible knowledge. I don't know exactly. Elena said it depends on how much healing a person does and how serious the conditions they heal. Small things like cuts and bruises barely affect the healer, but something like Sophie's complete paralysis could kill him or age him rapidly. Elena went from looking 25 to 70 in just 10 years of heavy healing. Her hair went white. Her skin became like paper. Her bones became brittle. She gave her life force to save others. They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices pressing on them like a physical presence. Next door, Sophie slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, her legs showing their first signs of muscle tone in 8 years. Down the hall, Diego dreamed of walking hand in hand with his great-grandmother through golden fields that existed nowhere on Earth. There's one more thing you need to know, Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. Elena told me the gift gets stronger with each generation. Diego may be able to heal things that even she couldn't touch, but the price will be proportionally higher. Mrs. Rodriguez, Robert looked directly into her eyes. What would you do if you were me? Would you let your child sacrifice himself to heal another child, even if that child belonged to someone you respected? Robert looked toward Sophie's room, where his daughter slept with hope in her heart for the first time in her life. Then he looked back at Carmen's tear-stained face, seeing a mother's love wrestling with a mother's terror. I don't know, he admitted with brutal honesty. But we need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with. There has to be a way to protect Diego while helping Sophie. There has to be another path. Elena used to say that love always finds a way, Carmen said softly. But sometimes the way love finds costs everything we have to give. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like a cosmic warning, as if the universe itself was preparing for the difficult choices that lay ahead. If you're eager to know how this story develops, leave your comment and share with someone who would also like to know this incredible journey. Dr. Robert Williams had never believed in miracles, but he had also never been desperate enough to research them. His office now resembled a war room, with medical journals scattered alongside printouts about faith healing, energy work, and documented cases of unexplained recoveries. He had contacted colleagues in Colombia, anthropologists who studied indigenous healing practices, even some doctors who had quietly witnessed similar phenomena. "You're losing your objectivity," Dr. Hayes warned during their weekly department meeting. "The hospital board is asking questions about your recent research requests. Grant applications for studies on supernatural healing won't advance your career." Robert barely heard her concerns. Sophie had been actually walking, for short distances with the help of parallel bars. 2 weeks ago, such progress would have been impossible, but each session with Diego left the boy weaker, and yesterday he had fainted twice during school. "I found something," Robert announced to Carmen during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. He had taken to meeting her in the chapel, the only place that seemed appropriate for discussions that challenged everything he had been trained to believe. Carmen looked up from her prayers, hope and fear warring in her dark eyes. "About healing, about your grandmother. I contacted a colleague at National University in Bogota. Elena Vasquez is mentioned in several anthropological studies from the 80s. She wasn't just a local healer, Carmen. She was part of a lineage, a family line that goes back generations." Robert pulled out photocopied pages from academic journals, dense text in Spanish and English describing hereditary healing abilities in isolated Colombian communities. "According to these studies, families like yours appear every few generations throughout South America. The gift manifests differently in each person, but the core ability remains the same." "What else do they say?" Carmen's voice was barely above a whisper. that healers rarely live beyond 50, and that their children often die young from mysterious illnesses that sound remarkably similar to what's happening with Diego. The weight of this revelation settled between them like a stone. Diego wasn't just risking his health, he was following a pattern that had killed others like him for generations. "But there's one more thing," Robert continued, his voice gaining strength. "One study mentions a healer named Carlos Mendez, who learned to share the burden, to distribute the cost of healing among willing family members. He lived to 67. Carmen's eyes widened. "Share the burden? How?" "The research is incomplete, but it suggests that if multiple family members with even dormant healing abilities work together, they can divide the physical cost among them. Instead of one person bearing all the damage, several people take smaller portions." "Do you think I might have some of Elena's gift?" "There's only one way to find out, Carmen." Robert hesitated, knowing what he was about to suggest would sound insane to anyone listening. "I want to be tested too. If Diego can somehow teach others to help carry this load, I want to learn." "Doctor, you don't understand what you're asking. This isn't something you can learn in medical school." "Then teach me the way Elena taught your family." "Sophie is my daughter, and Diego is risking his life for her. The least I can do is try to help share that risk." That night, while Diego lay exhausted in his mother's arms after another healing session with Sophie, Carmen made a decision that would change all their lives. "Mijo, would you be willing to teach Dr. Williams and me how to help you the way Abuela Elena used to teach her family?" Diego looked up with those ancient blue eyes and smiled weakly. "Abuela Elena was waiting for you to ask, Mama. She says it's time for all of us to work together." The storage room in the basement of Santa Clara Medical Center hadn't been used for months, filled with outdated equipment and forgotten supplies. At midnight, it became a classroom for lessons that couldn't be found in any medical textbook. Diego sat on an improvised cushion made from old sheets, his small hands resting palms up on his knees in a pose that seemed too mature for his 7 years. Carmen and Robert sat before him, both adults struggling against their own skepticism about what they were attempting. "Abuela Elena says healing starts with feeling," Diego explained in his quiet, serious voice. "You have to feel where the hurt lives in the sick person. Then you have to be willing to invite that hurt into your own body." Robert struggled with the concept. "But medically this is impossible. Pain and injury aren't transferable substances." "Doctor," Carmen said gently, "maybe tonight we set aside what's medically possible and focus on what might be necessary." Diego reached out to both of them, his small fingers surprisingly warm. "Close your eyes. Think about Sophie. Picture her legs, but don't see the broken parts. See the parts that want to work." The moment Diego's skin touched theirs, both adults gasped. A warmth unlike anything either had experienced flowed through their arms. Not the heat of fever or friction, but something that seemed to originate from a source deeper than blood or bone. "Now feel where her legs hurt," Diego whispered. "Not the pain she feels, but the sadness her legs carry from being broken for so long." Robert felt ridiculous, sitting in a storage room at midnight, trying to psychically connect with his daughter's paralyzed limbs. But when Diego's grip tightened, something changed. A strange heaviness settled in Robert's own legs. A sensation like invisible weights pressing on his thighs and calves. "I feel it," Carmen breathed, her voice full of wonder and fear. "It's like her legs are crying." "That's the hurt," Diego confirmed. "Now, here's the hard part. You have to be willing to take some of that crying into your own legs, but just a little bit. We're sharing 3 ways now." For the next hour, Diego guided them through exercises that had no name in medical terminology. They practiced sensing injury, identifying the emotional and physical components of trauma, and most importantly, learning to accept small portions of suffering into their own bodies. By the end of the lesson, all 3 were exhausted. Robert's legs ached with phantom pains he couldn't explain, and Carmen found herself limping slightly as they prepared to leave. "Did it work?" Robert asked. "We'll find out tomorrow," Diego said simply. But I already feel lighter, like I'm not carrying Sophie's hurt alone anymore. The next morning, Sophie's progress was remarkable. She took 12 steps with minimal support, her longest walk since her paralysis began. But more importantly, Diego remained alert and energetic throughout the day, the first time in weeks that he hadn't collapsed after a healing session. "It's working," Robert told Carmen during lunch break. "Somehow, impossibly, it's really working." But his relief was premature. That evening, Carmen received a call that chilled her blood. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Principal Martinez from Diego's school. We need you to come immediately. Diego collapsed during recess and is saying things that are concerning." When Carmen and Robert arrived at the elementary school, they found Diego sitting in the school nurse's office, his eyes unfocused and distant. "Abuela Elena says there are others coming," he whispered when he saw them. "Other healers who want to help. But some of them are angry that we're sharing the gift with people who weren't born to it." "But what others?" Carmen asked, her voice tight with new fear. "I don't know their names, but they're coming to the hospital tonight. They want to test us." At 3 in the morning, Santa Clara Medical Center felt different. The usual nighttime calm was disturbed by an energy that made the fluorescent lights flicker and left the hospital's sensitive equipment jittery. Carmen had spent the night sleeping in a chair beside Diego's hospital bed after his collapse at school. She woke to find her son standing at the window, staring at the parking lot with an intensity that frightened her. "They're here," Diego said without turning. "Who's here, mijo?" "The other healers. Abuela Elena brought them." Carmen joined him at the window and saw them immediately. 5 figures standing in the parking lot, illuminated by security lights. They ranged in age from a teenager to an elderly man, but all shared the same unmistakable presence that Diego carried, the same supernatural stillness. "Diego, what do they want?" "To see if we're doing the right thing. Some of them think Dr. Williams shouldn't be learning our family's gift. They think it's dangerous to teach strangers." Dr. Robert arrived at the hospital early, as had become his habit since Diego's training began. He found Carmen and Diego in the pediatric ward, both staring out the window at the group in the parking lot. "Who are they?" Robert asked, though something deep in his chest already knew the answer. "Family," Diego said simply. "Great cousins mostly. And an uncle who died before I was born, but still watches over our family line." Robert felt his rational mind struggling to process this information. "Diego, are you saying there are dead people in our parking lot?" "Just Uncle Carlos. The others are alive, but they live far away. Abuela Elena called them to come test us." As if summoned by their conversation, the group began moving toward the hospital entrance. Carmen gripped Diego's hand instinctively. "What kind of test?" "They want to see if sharing the gift has made it stronger or weaker, and they want to know if Dr. Williams can really handle the burden without it killing him." The elevator chimed softly, and moments later, the group appeared in the hallway. Up close, Robert could see that each person carried the same genetic markers as Diego, the piercing blue eyes, the blonde hair that seemed unusual on their Hispanic features, the air of quiet authority. The oldest, a woman who appeared to be in her 70s, stepped forward and spoke in accented English. "I am Esperanza Vasquez, Elena's sister. I came from Mexico to see the child who carries our grandmother's strongest gift." Her gaze fixed on Diego with an intensity that made Robert step protectively closer to the boy. "And I'm here to determine whether this doctor," she looked at Robert with obvious skepticism, "is worthy of learning our family's sacred knowledge." "With all respect," Robert said, finding his voice, "I'm not trying to steal anything. I'm just trying to help my daughter and protect your great-nephew." "Protection?" Esperanza's laugh was sharp. "You understand nothing about protection. The gift has been in our bloodline for 12 generations. It has rules, costs, and consequences that outsiders cannot comprehend." She turned to Diego, her expression softening slightly. "Show me what you've learned about sharing, Netito." Diego nodded and reached out to his mother, then to Robert. The moment all three were connected, the hospital room filled with the same golden warmth they had experienced during their midnight lessons. But this time, the warmth was met by a crackling energy from Esperanza and the other healers. The air itself seemed to vibrate with competing forces. Diego's gentle, shared healing and a more ancient, demanding power from his relatives. Interesting, Esperanza murmured. The gift grows stronger when shared, but also wilder, harder to control. Oh, she stepped back, her expression grave. There will be a formal test tomorrow night. If the doctor fails, he must promise never to attempt healing again. If he succeeds... She paused, studying Robert intently. If he succeeds, he will be bound to this family and its responsibilities for the rest of his life. What does the test involve? Robert asked. You will attempt to heal someone whose condition is beyond current medical treatment. If you can succeed without dying or going insane from the transferred trauma, you will be accepted. If you fail, I won't fail, Robert said with more confidence than he felt. Esperanza smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We shall see, Doctor. We shall see. Leave your guesses in the comments about what you think will happen in the test. The abandoned wing of Santa Clara Medical Center hadn't been used since the hospital's expansion 5 years ago. The corridors were dark, the rooms empty, but tonight they vibrated with an energy that made the walls themselves seem alive. Esperanza Vasquez had transformed the largest room into something between a medical facility and an ancient ritual space. Candles provided the only light, their flames casting dancing shadows on equipment that Robert recognized but had never seen used in this context. The test is simple in concept, complex in execution, Esperanza explained as the gathered healers formed a circle around a hospital bed. You will attempt to heal a condition that your modern medicine has declared incurable. If you can succeed while sharing the burden with Diego and Carmen, you pass. If I fail, the transferred trauma could kill you or drive you insane. The mind was not meant to experience certain kinds of suffering directly. On the bed lay a young woman Robert had never seen before, unconscious and connected to portable monitors. Her chart, handwritten in Spanish and English, revealed a devastating diagnosis: terminal brain cancer, multiple tumors, weeks to live. This is my granddaughter Isabella, said one of the visiting healers, a middle-aged man with tears in his eyes. She's 22 years old. The doctors in Arizona sent her home to die. Robert felt the weight of impossibility settling on his shoulders. As a neurosurgeon, he knew exactly how devastating Isabella's condition was. He had seen dozens of similar cases, and modern medicine offered no hope. I can't cure brain cancer, he said honestly. Even with whatever gifts I might be developing, this is beyond... Nothing is beyond the gift when properly applied, Esperanza interrupted. Elena once cured cancer that had spread throughout a man's entire body. But the cost, she gestured toward Diego. The boy will age years in a single night if this healing succeeds. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Robert looked at Diego, who nodded solemnly, despite being only 7 years old. Dr. Williams, Diego said quietly, Isabella has 2 little girls at home, twins. They're 4 years old and keep asking when mommy is coming home. The decision crystallized in Robert's mind. This wasn't just about proving himself to a family of healers. This was about a mother returning to her daughters. What do I need to do? The ritual that followed challenged everything Robert thought he knew about medicine, consciousness, and the nature of healing itself. With Diego and Carmen on either side of him, their hands creating a connection that seemed to bypass normal neural pathways, Robert placed his palms on Isabella's skull. The moment contact was made, Robert's world exploded in agony, unlike anything he had ever experienced. The cancer wasn't just a collection of abnormal cells. It was a living darkness that seemed to feed on hope and joy. As he drew it into himself, following Diego's whispered instructions, Robert felt the malignant growth spreading through his own brain tissue. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattered, and for terrifying moments he couldn't remember his own name. But throughout it all, he felt Diego and Carmen sharing the burden, taking portions of the darkness into themselves, their love for each other and for Isabella, creating a network of shared suffering. Focus on her daughters, Diego gasped, his young face pale with effort. Picture them hugging their mommy. Hold that image in your mind while the cancer tries to make you forget everything good. For what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, the three of them battled Isabella's cancer on a level that had nothing to do with medical training and everything to do with willpower and love. Robert felt years of his life being burned as fuel in a fire, but he also felt the tumors in Isabella's brain shrinking, dissolving, being absorbed into the shared network of healers. When it was over, all three collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Robert woke 12 hours later to find Isabella sitting up in bed, alert and speaking clearly to her weeping relatives. Her latest brain scan, performed by a baffled radiology team, showed no trace of cancer. But the cost was evident. Diego looked visibly older, his face carrying lines of premature maturity. Carmen's hair had streaks of grey that hadn't been there before, and Robert himself felt hollow, as if something essential had been permanently drained from his core. "You passed the test," Esperanza said solemnly. "You are now bound to our family and its sacred responsibility. But more importantly," her stern expression softened, "you have returned a mother to her daughters." As Isabella embraced her twin daughters in the hospital room, Robert realized that some prices were worth paying, no matter how high. 3 weeks after the test, the consequences of Robert's acceptance into the healer's family became clear. Diego had grown taller overnight, his face losing its childish roundness and gaining the angular features of a boy several years older. Carmen looked exhausted despite sleeping 10 hours a night, and Robert found himself needing reading glasses for the first time in his life. But their sacrifice had created something unprecedented, a healing network that could tackle conditions no single healer could survive. Word spread quietly through certain communities. Desperate families began arriving at Santa Clara Medical Center, not for traditional medical treatment, but seeking the miracle doctor who worked with the Rodriguez family. Robert found himself treating conditions he had never imagined. Children born without immune systems, elderly patients with aggressive dementia, accident victims with injuries that should have been fatal. Each healing took its toll, but shared among 3 people, the cost was manageable, barely. "We can't keep up this pace," Carmen warned during one of their midnight meetings in the abandoned wing. "Diego is showing signs of premature aging, and you look like you've lost 10 years of your life." Robert studied his reflection in the dark window. His hair was graying at the temples, and lines had appeared around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. But Sophie wasn't just walking, she was running, dancing, living the normal life of an 8-year-old girl. "How many more?" he asked. "How many people are coming?" "Esperanza says there are at least 50 families who have heard about us. Children with conditions modern medicine can't touch. Adults who've been given death sentences by their doctors. And if we stop, then they die," Diego said simply, appearing in the doorway despite supposedly being asleep in the family quarters Robert had arranged for them in the hospital. "But if we continue at this rate, we die instead." The impossible mathematics of their situation hung in the air like smoke. To save others, they were consuming their own life force at an unsustainable rate. "There has to be another way," Robert said. "Some method of healing that doesn't require such sacrifice." "There is," said a new voice from the shadows. Dr. Patricia Hayes stepped into the light, her expression unreadable. "I've been watching what you're doing, Robert. Monitoring the patients, reviewing the cases. What you've accomplished is medically impossible, but also undeniably real." Robert tensed, prepared for accusations of fraud or demands for explanations he couldn't provide. "I want to help," Patricia continued. "I don't understand how your healing works, but I've seen the results. Children who should have died are going home healthy. If there's a way to share this burden further, create a larger network." "You're talking about expanding the healing circle," Carmen said slowly. "I'm talking about combining the best of modern medicine with whatever gift your family possesses. Imagine if we could identify the most desperate cases and focus our efforts there, while using traditional medicine for everything else." Diego studied Dr. Hayes with those ancient blue eyes. "She has the potential," he said finally. "I can see the healing light in her, but it's sleeping. We could wake it up." "Is it safe?" Robert asked. "Teaching more people? Safer than burning ourselves out trying to save everyone alone," Carmen replied. "But it means bringing more people into our family. Once they're connected to the healing network, they're bound to it for life." Dr. Hayes nodded seriously. "I understand the commitment. The question is, how many healers do we need to make this sustainable?" "At least 7, Diego answered, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral knowledge. 7 healers can share the burden of almost any healing without losing years of their lives. Then we find 4 more, Robert decided. But we choose carefully. This isn't just about medical knowledge. It's about people willing to sacrifice part of themselves for strangers. As they planned their expansion, none of them noticed the figure watching from the parking lot below. Esperanza Vasquez stood in the shadows, her expression troubled. The gift was growing beyond what any of them had anticipated, and with growth came dangers that even her ancient knowledge couldn't predict. Tomorrow, she would have to make a choice that could either save their healing network or destroy it entirely. Do you think expanding the healer network is a good idea? Leave your opinions in the comments. 6 months after Isabella's miraculous recovery, Santa Clara Medical Center had quietly become something unprecedented, a hospital where medicine and miracle coexisted. The official records showed only remarkable recovery rates in the pediatric ward, but those who worked there whispered about the Rodriguez family and their mysterious gift. Dr. Robert Williams stood at his office window, watching Sophie play in the hospital garden below. At 8 years old, she ran and jumped with the boundless energy of any healthy child, her golden curls catching the morning sunlight. But there was something different about her now, something that made Robert both proud and worried. "She's been asking questions," Carmen said, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee, a ritual that had developed between them over the months of shared healing. "Yesterday, she wanted to know why Diego looks older now and why your hair has gray streaks." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that sometimes helping others costs something, but love makes the cost worth paying." Robert accepted the coffee gratefully. His hands showed the tremor that had developed after particularly difficult healings, and some mornings he felt decades older than his 33 years. But the children they had saved made every sacrifice meaningful. "The review board meets today," Robert said. "They want answers about our success rates. How do we explain what we can't document?" Before Carmen could answer, Diego appeared in the doorway. The boy, who had been 7 years old 6 months ago, now looked like a mature 10-year-old, his face carrying wisdom that belonged to someone much older. The accelerated aging had stabilized, but the change was permanent. "Maybe we don't have to explain anything," Diego said quietly. "Sophie has something to show you." They found Sophie in the garden, sitting beside Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had been admitted with end-stage arthritis in both hands. Sophie held the woman's twisted fingers gently, her eyes closed in concentration. "Sophie, what are you doing?" Robert asked, though something deep in his chest already knew the answer. "Helping Mrs. Patterson's hands feel better," Sophie replied without opening her eyes. "But not the way you and Diego do it. I found a different way." As they watched, Mrs. Patterson's fingers began to straighten, the swollen joints reducing to normal size. But unlike their healing sessions, Sophie showed no signs of strain or exhaustion. Instead, she seemed to glow with health and vitality. "How is this possible?" Carmen whispered. "Because I already know what it's like to be broken," Sophie explained, opening her eyes and smiling at Mrs. Patterson's amazed expression as she flexed her pain-free fingers. "When I help people, I don't take their hurt into me. Instead, I give them my memory of getting better. I share my healing instead of taking their sickness." Dr. Patricia Hayes, who had become the 4th member of their healing circle, emerged from the hospital carrying a tablet full of test results. "Robert, you need to see this. Sophie's neurological scans this morning show activity patterns I've never encountered. Her brain is generating healing energy instead of absorbing trauma." Esperanza Vasquez appeared on the garden path, having arrived for her weekly monitoring of their expanding network. The elderly woman studied Sophie with eyes that held 12 generations of healing wisdom. "The gift has evolved," she said with awe in her voice. "Elena always said it would happen eventually, that one of our children would be born not just to heal, but to heal the healers themselves." "What does this mean?" Robert asked. "It means Sophie can teach others to heal without sacrifice. She can show them how to give strength instead of taking pain." Esperanza knelt beside Sophie, her stern expression softening to something approaching reverence. "Child, can you sense the healing light in other people? Can you help them find it?" Sophie nodded seriously. "Many people have light inside them. They just don't know how to make it work, but I can show them." Over the next hour, they witnessed something that would change everything. Sophie worked with 3 hospital volunteers, teaching them to access their own healing abilities without the devastating cost that Diego's method required. By focusing on sharing health rather than absorbing disease, these new healers could help patients improve without aging or transferring trauma. "We can expand the network safely now," Dr. Hayes said, her voice full of excitement. "If Sophie can train healers who don't pay the physical price, we could help thousands of people." "But there's still a cost," Diego reminded them, his young old face serious. "Not everyone is strong enough to give healing energy without getting tired, and some conditions are too big for this gentler method." "Then we use both approaches," Robert decided. "Sophie's method for most cases and our trauma-sharing technique only for the most desperate situations. We create a true medical miracle, healing that combines the best of science and spirit." 6 months later, the Thompson Rodriguez Institute for Advanced Healing quietly opened in a renovated wing of Santa Clara Medical Center. Officially, it was a research facility studying innovative therapeutic techniques. Unofficially, it was a place where children learned to walk again, where terminal diagnoses became recovery stories, and where the impossible happened with quiet regularity. Sophie, now 9 years old and thriving, had become the Institute's youngest teacher, showing medical professionals from around the world how to access healing abilities they never knew they possessed. Diego, despite his premature aging, served as the bridge between traditional healing wisdom and modern applications. Carmen coordinated the growing network of healers, while Robert provided the medical oversight that kept their work credible and sustainable. Dr. Hayes had taken over Robert's former position as department head, allowing him to focus entirely on developing their revolutionary healing protocols. The review board's questions had been answered not with explanations they couldn't understand, but with results they couldn't deny. "We're changing everything," Robert said one evening as he watched Sophie help a young cancer patient rediscover their own healing abilities. "Medicine will never be the same because of her." "That's good," Carmen replied, her hand resting on Diego's shoulder as they watched their miracle family. "The world needs more healers, not more sickness." As the sun set over the city, casting golden light through the Institute's windows, Sophie looked up from her work with a smile that seemed to contain all the hope in the world. "Daddy," she said, "I can see the healing light in almost everyone now. It's not just our family, it's everybody. They just needed someone to show them how to find it." And so, the gift that had begun with a father's desperate love for his paralyzed daughter had evolved into something much greater, a new understanding of healing itself, where love and medicine worked together to create miracles that no one had to die for. In the quiet moments between treatments, when the Institute settled into peaceful nighttime routines, those who listened carefully could sometimes hear Elena Vasquez's whispered gratitude, finally at rest, knowing that her family's gift had found its true purpose, not just to heal the sick, but to teach the world to heal itself. The circle was complete, but the healing had only just begun. If this story touched your heart in any way, don't forget to share your experience in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful stories are those that make us believe the impossible can be possible, and that true love always finds a way to heal what is broken. Thank you for following this incredible journey with us.